From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hello there, and welcome again to Chicago Newsroom here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis with another conversation about our city. And an interesting thing has just happened just literally minutes before we rolled tape on today's show that it looks like Eddie Johnson has just decided to fire 7 of the police officers who were involved in the McDonald shooting, apparently for filing false police reports. So there's dramatic news going on there. And there's lots of breaking news because this morning, the Chicago Police Department released videos of a chase from Tuesday, which as we're speaking was about 48 hours ago, which has a very different outcome. We'll talk about that on the show today. But the Chicago Police Department seems to be very big on releasing videos quickly. And especially in this case, because I would have to say, it puts them in a very good light. It's a professional apprehension of the suspect and so forth. Anyway, today on the show, 2 of my favorite people joining us today. Cheryl Corley is here from National Public Radio Chicago, and Phillip Jackson is here from Black Lives Matter. I guess that's... Oh my God! Should we just roll the tape back and start over again? Did I just say Black Lives Matter? Well, all right, okay.
Oh, I've been called many things in my life.
Right before we went on, we were talking about some of the things going on with Black Lives Matter, and we were talking about the fact that when you get to a certain age, things start happening to your brain, and you do things erratically, and that was one of them right there. Black Star Project.
Absolutely.
We got that right this time. And the orange T-shirt indicates that
Peace
you are...
in the hood. Absolutely.
You are planning something for the Labor Day weekend, and it's not just a cookout, right?
No, absolutely. The Fraternal Order of Police sent out a flyer to all of its members saying, you should not work any non-mandatory overtime over the Labor Day weekend. Now, Labor Day weekend last year, we had 54 people shot and 8 people killed. Mm-hmm. And so that flyer was almost a notice that there will be purge-like activities where people will just have a field day doing what they want because we won't have enough policemen on the streets. So what we
Purge
did,
meaning the reference to the film.
to the movie,
Yeah.
where for 12 hours, you can shoot anybody you want, you can kill anybody you want, you can rape or rob anybody you want for that time period. And so we saw that, and we said, well, no, we don't want a purge in our community. We want a surge. We want a surge of peace in our community. So we organized the 10 communities with the most violence, with the most shootings, with the most murders. And we are getting people to come out, churches, community organizations, fraternities, Masons, veterans, and we're asking them all to be on the streets during that same time that the Federation of Police said that they don't want their people patrolling, protecting us. And we said, we'll protect ourselves.
I don't suppose you or anybody has any indication yet of whether a lot of police officers are going to take that opportunity not to take the overtime and patrol. We just simply don't know at this point.
Well, actually, police officers have been coming up to me and saying, Phillip, we saw you, we saw what you're saying, and we support you.
Good. Will they support you by being on duty?
Well, not only will they support us, and I can't answer for all the police
of course
officers, but we're inviting police officers to come to those 10 communities, to come to Inglewood, to come to Roseland, come to South Shore, come to Austin, and to party with us, to share in peace with us. They can be in uniform or out of uniform. You know, the police have really gotten a bad rap. Really a bad rap. The things that are happening, especially in black communities across the country, are absolutely things that the police have no control over. These are things that are created by forces bigger and stronger than the police. And then after these problems are created, they send in the police to tamp down the communities of violence. the police have no chance of succeeding in that situation.
Well,
none.
We just happen to have Cheryl Corley here, who we were just joking her new title is Urban War Correspondent, because you've been to all the uprisings around the country. You started with, well, not started with, but you were at Ferguson. You were in Minneapolis. You have just come from Milwaukee.
Yes.
And I'm taken by some of what Phillip said that I think is common, and I think you would agree to all of these places, that we're really asking the police to do things that police can't do. It's not in their toolbox.
Well, in some instances, yes. I mean, I think that everybody agrees that the police have a tough and often dangerous job. I think that other folks would disagree that there are instances where police are not taking steps that could be avoided. And I think you see that those kinds of comments, like from the Department of Justice, when they examine some of the situations that happen with these shootings and really talk about the makeup of the police department, some of the problems with profiling and that sort of thing. So I think that, you know, there's always two sides to the coin here. Yes, the police have a tough job, and often they are blamed for things that they are not responsible for, but there are instances where there is policy and practice that goes on that needs to be changed, and that the community feels is directed towards them and that they should protest against.
I think when I said that in the introduction, I'm referring to the conversation that we always have about such things as even public education, that there are these traumatic forces working in some of our communities, and we seem to think, well, why aren't the schools teaching our kids? Why aren't the cops providing with us with peace on the streets? And you have to go 3 or 4 levels higher than that to figure out what some of the social issues are.
A lot of the things, a lot of the places where these shootings happen, of course, have really complex issues going on in them. You know, if you mentioned that I just came from Milwaukee, and Milwaukee has such an extremely high unemployment rate for black men, for instance. They have the highest incarceration rate in the country for black men. And so you have all of these problems that exacerbate the kind of situation that happens there, and that really frustrates people. So you have this kind of powder keg, you know, kind of waiting to explode. So when these things do happen in communities, you see what happened with you know, the riots that broke out there, the arson that occurred. That sort. There's no excuse for that sort of thing happening, but you have the conditions there that make that happen.
And my example here is this past 4th of July weekend. So on this past 4th of July weekend, last year, 65 people were shot in Chicago. And so Superintendent Johnson ramps up, and he brings in 5,000 additional officers. The state police, Cook County sheriffs, Chicago policemen who would have been off. He brings in 5,000 additional officers. And they call it success because instead of having 65 shootings, they had 63. And that's my example of there are not enough policemen in China to stop what's happening in black communities across this country. And so Cheryl is absolutely right, or you're right. Not only is it happening in Chicago, it's in Memphis, it's in Newark, it's in Minneapolis, it's in Ferguson. It is the whole country. And we need a comprehensive response, a policy response. In fact, the White House has failed us miserably on this particular issue. And what we've done, we've put the police right in the middle. And this is a battle that the police are destined to lose.
I found it really interesting, Cheryl. You did an excellent report when you were in Minneapolis with the Philando Castile case. And sometimes as we know as reporters, you can tell the bigger story by telling a smaller story. And this was an excellent example of that you looked into the arrest record for this one individual who was, I think we all remember, this is the guy who was shot by the police in his car with his girlfriend essentially live streaming it. And it turned out that he, well, I guess we know the story. He had a firearm, but he also had a license to carry it, and he got shot. But the more interesting story than that was the story that you told about his record.
Yeah, Philando Castile seemed to be a target. He was stopped during his lifetime, 46 traffic stops. The first time he was stopped was before his 19th birthday, when he still had his learner's permit. And the last stop, of course, on July 6th, I believe that was the date when he died. But yeah, he was stopped. It was a life of traffic fines and being stopped by the police.
$6,000 in fines.
Yeah, and a lot of it, the stops were for things that you couldn't see if you were just driving. You would have to get pulled over first to have that happen. So, that was a situation. We really wanted to take a look, and I did this along with another reporter, Ida Peralta, just to investigate, how many times he had been stopped. Because a lot of times, when we look at all these cases and we look at all this video that comes through, I often think about what made change happen. And, if you think about the civil rights movement, it was a photograph that kind of galvanized that with Emmett Till, right? When his mom decided, I want the world to see this. And so what you have happening with these videos now is that people are seeing things that are happening, and you have to believe, because a lot of times people don't believe. So with Philando Castile, it was like, okay, well, we obviously have video, but what drove this? What is happening to people in communities? And to a point that you brought up, it's interesting too that a lot of people go, well, let's not just talk about police and the shootings that occur. Let's also talk about, black on black crime and what's happening in these neighborhoods and all of the shootings that occur. And I think people have to realize that it's not an either or, it's just not. And you have these things that are happening. It's a two-pronged approach that we have to take, because these things are happening in so many communities.
That is a very interesting narrative that just seems to be kind of springing up in the last couple of months. This thing about, I noticed that, a horribly tragic thing of the police officer's son who was shot and killed just in the last few days. And immediately there's this kind of comment section action of like, I notice I don't see Black Lives Matter protesting this shooting. And I think you just have to say that it's a little bit, they're all tragic, but they are different. There is a very strong difference between these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Good. I was just going to say, you also see efforts like what Phillip is talking about. You see people who are taking steps to do things. They might not get the publicity. Right. So it's not like people are ignoring the other things.
And that's such an important point too.
And I just want to go back to what Cheryl was saying about the investigative report she did with Castile. I'm around a lot of young black men with what I do. We do a lot of mentoring, tutoring, a lot of on-the-street work. And whenever I'm in a room, not whenever, but several times, I've been in a room with maybe 20, 30, 40 young black men. And we come up with the question, how many of you have either been stopped by the police recently or had a negative interaction with the police recently? Almost every hand in the room goes up. And so going back to Mr. Castile and his 40 or so interactions with the police, that's commonplace in the African American community. And so there's almost a script that the police are using nationally when it comes to policing and patrolling African American communities. And once again, I'm not blaming the police. I'm saying that there is something larger, something, I don't want to call it insidious, but there's something that is causing this to happen. And that's going to be the cure. There's no number of policemen in Chicago that can stop the violence in Chicago. But there are many constructive ideas: employment, education, family development.
Stopping the disinvestment.
Absolutely. So, but that's a direction that we in Chicago, no, I don't see, I see very few people across the country doing those kinds of things. And therefore, we send in the police, and the police are going to lose. And I like the police, by the way. And a lot of people say, Phillip, you really can't say that. I understand the need for police. I support the police. Now, I don't support bad policing. That's got to go. Yeah. I want the same kind of policing in Inglewood that they have in Barrington. I want the same kind of policing in Austin that they have in Lake Forest. That's what we want in our community.
It's interesting, though, you talk about, the disinvestment in communities and, not having the things that you're talking about, the employment, the jobs, and all of that, and how that all plays into this. There are, and I don't think we should ignore, though, the efforts that do happen. If you think of Pullman and see some of the things that are happening in that neighborhood, if you see some of the things that are going on in Inglewood with community groups and some of the commercial development that's starting to come in there, I think we think of this as a really bleak time sometimes, and it is, but I also think that there are glimmers that, you have to kind of hold on to and to recognize. We talk about the civil rights movement. A lot of people didn't like that from the beginning, and also it wasn't something that was accomplished in, 6 months or a year. The advances that happened there took a long time.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but I also worry a little bit because over the past 10, 12, 14 years, 215,000 black people have been forced out of the city of Chicago. And those are my words, forced. Some people say they left on their own volition. In my opinion, the pressures of Chicago have been driving them out. Higher rents from some of the gentrification that we're talking about, few or bleak employment possibilities. So they're leaving. And some communities are doing what they call improving. And improvement is a code word for fewer African Americans in those communities. And I'm absolutely against that. I believe that Chicago can be a great city with the people that we currently have in Chicago. Yeah. Unfortunately, so many of them are poor, lower economic, poorly educated African American people.
I wonder if there isn't a kind of an echo here of the Black Metropolis argument that although it was created for all the wrong reasons, there was once a thriving African American community in Chicago, as densely packed as it was, with professionals and professional services and everything else. And then when open housing came along, people had the opportunity to leave, and they did. And in a weird sort of way, it kind of destroyed that economic engine. I know that's a stretch. But what's interesting to me about what's happening now is that you're seeing people who were in this community but had the opportunity to leave, saw that things were not going well, and got out. And I'm wondering if there isn't something of a kind of a, these are fraught terms, but if it isn't kind of like a little bit of a brain drain that some of the, what do you want to call them? Some of the better people in the community have left, and you're left with people who are the more desperate people, the people with less opportunity.
I understand the argument, and we hear it a lot. But it's always bothered me. I think that you know, black people have to be a certain way. That if you have any population of folks, immigrants who come to this country and who are in a particular neighborhood, and there are people who say, okay, I'm earning a certain amount of money now, I'm going to move out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to better my circumstances. Nobody says anything about that.
That is
but if a
absolutely
black
right.
person does
Right,
it,
right.
it's like, you know, it's like,
I think maybe I'm being, these conversations are so delicate, and I feel like I'm being a little bit misinterpreted here, because I'm not criticizing the people for leaving.
I understand.
And I
but
completely
but it's
understand.
just an argument that just,
Right,
you know,
right.
just bothers me, because it's like, okay, well, what are you saying, that black people shouldn't be able to
But
do
let me-
that?
Well, what we are saying is,
Can I just say one quick thing?
Go ahead.
Because I'm feeling like I'm being attacked by Cheryl.
are being attacked right now.
Not attacked. No, I know. We're old friends. It's okay. No, here's what's interesting about that. When you have a group of people living in a really substandard neighborhood, I mean, the physical plant of the neighborhood is deteriorated, and they leave. There's not something that's equal to what we saw, let's say, in Pilsen, let's say, where a lot of the Mexican Americans gradually have been moving out of Pilsen, and Pilsen has been becoming another kind of community, because there was a physical plant left behind that could be taken over,
And not a lot of disinvestment.
and not as much anyway.
As
Certainly,
much.
yeah.
Some.
But when you're talking about the suburbs of Bronzeville, there's just not a lot there. There's a lot of empty lots.
well, I actually worry about what you brought up, Ken. I worry about the brain drain of high quality, talented, academically inclined African Americans leaving the black community and leaving those who have lesser potentials than those people. And so when children are young, there's a message that they receive that the reason you succeed is so that you can get out, so that you can go somewhere else and be successful, rather than the message being succeed so that you can come back, so that you can stay here, so that you can build up where we are.
But I'm going to defend Cheryl here. Nobody said that to the Polish immigrants, to the German immigrants, to the Italian immigrants. You've got to come back and rebuild Little Italy.
You know what? They just do. They just
I
do.
don't think that message is not gone out as well. I mean, I think that there are plenty of African Americans who believe too that you support and who stay. And who have come back. Look at Bronzeville, you know, and the changing. So then you have this whole class dichotomy that we could go into.
There's another
as well,
show,
right?
Yeah.
So, so you know, I think all of that is there, but you know, you probably need more of it if you're going to sustain the community.
And resources. We can't have this conversation without talking about resources, investment, and that's what these people, if you will, middle-class black people, when they leave the community, those are resources that are leaving the community. And that means it's going to be so much harder for the few people, not the few, for whoever is left to achieve almost anything.
Because these are undereducated and under-resourced
Because they
people.
are. And so really,
Oh boy, Cheryl's rolling her eyes. I feel like I've wandered into something here.
And that's good. But then again, we have to walk up and down these streets. And then again, this Labor Day weekend is coming when they're projecting 60 people being shot. And so we have to take a much more intelligent approach to how to solve these kinds of problems. And I do have to tell you, I'm getting calls from all over the country, from government agencies, from foundations, that are basically telling me, how do we stop our city from becoming another Chicago?
Before we run completely out of time and slam into the clock wall, you're doing something very interesting, and I think we need to talk about what you're up to. You've got something going on at Loyola Park this weekend, right? Well, I think this is very cool. You've written, tell us about this.
Okay, all right. Well, thank Thank you.
why not?
Yeah, I am doing, along with Lucy Smith, we are doing what we call The Great Migration of the Blues. It's a show about Southerners, blues musicians who moved up from the South, migrated to the city of Chicago, and formed the urban blues scene here in Chicago at Loyola Park, Friday, 6:30, free. It's part of the Chicago Night Out in the Parks.
With
events.
music.
With absolutely Lucy's band.
You got to have music.
And yes, I just wrote the narration. I do that, and Lucy's band performs. Great music.
Wow. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about that can help revitalize a community, that can help, transform a community. So I'm very, very happy for you doing that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And we were on the South Side as well. So we were in Sherman Park and Taylor Park, and
yes.
now in Loyola Park.
Excellent.
Phillip, there's been a lot of discussion recently about such things as stop and frisk, fetal policing, if you will, police, not doing their, just kind of like almost on strike. Are you seeing this in the community? Do you believe that, for example, stop and frisk, the apparent reduction of it is having an effect one way or another, or is this just stuff that the news media is reading or writing?
I've read the statistics in terms of stops and how they've decreased dramatically. The communities, I can't tell. So if they were doing a good job in the past with that versus what they're doing now, I can't tell the difference. The things that we need in the community, and I know I sound like a broken record, we need more jobs. We need better training. We need more community development, better parenting. Those are the kind of things that are going to make a difference. So stop and frisk or not, I can't tell.
I found it really interesting somewhere. I don't even remember where I read this now, but somewhere in the coverage of all of this, I read that during the McCarthy administration, police officers were being told they essentially had a quota of contact cards that they had to do, which is why there were thousands and thousands of contact cards. And to some degree, the amount of overtime that you were eligible for was dependent on how many contact cards you had created. So that appears to have been abolished, and I can't imagine that there's anything bad about abolishing that, but that's what I'm wondering. Does it make a difference? Do you have any sense of this, Cheryl?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I know that the stop and frisk policy in other places has been kind of ruled against, that you shouldn't be doing that. I know that New York was that was one of the places where it happened a lot, and they abolished that, I think, and did so here.
I mean, the reason that I bring it up is because, again, one of those narratives that we're all living with is, look at this, they stopped stop and frisk, and almost on that day, the crime rate went up and the shootings went up and, all of this. It would be so easy to make that link and to say, that's the reason that we're in this spike right now, but I'm not sure I buy it. I just don't think that's it.
I don't buy. I don't buy that particular argument. We absolutely need reform in the police department. The kind of policing that they've been done hasn't worked, and so they need a new kind of policing. One that connects them better to the communities that they're serving. There was a quote that came up once that I like to repeat. You cannot serve us if you don't know us. And that's where we are with the Chicago Police Department. They're trying to serve and protect people that they don't really know. And it's never going to be as successful as it could be.
You have so many police departments that have had to make changes because the Department of Justice has come in and said, okay, we've looked at this and you don't know the people here. Mm-hmm. And so Cincinnati is a good example where they had, massive kind of protests and riots in the police department came in and consent decree and you have to do these things, and the department had to make changes. I mean, Chicago's going through that right now. I mean, it's under investigation. Who knows what the end result will be? But reforms are going to come down the pike, and reforms are being made now, probably in preparation. But you've seen that in Ferguson, where it's not that. Sometimes you have to have somebody who says you have to make these changes, and that's the way these police departments have made some changes.
And one of the things I'd like to bring up as well is the fact that there are so few or not enough African American policemen out here, and probably Latino policemen as well.
Can I interrupt for just a second? We had Carol Marine sitting here last week, and she brought up, I thought, an excellent point that in the many 9 videos that you see of the O'Neill shooting, if you watch all of them, and it takes about an hour to watch the whole thing, you are astounded by the fact that there are probably 100 police officers on the scene here, and you can count them. There's 3, 4, maybe 5 African-American police officers at that response. Now, this is just a random event that just happened to have cameras on it, and you can see that. Whether that's important or not, I don't know, but it sure feels like it is.
It is critical. It is absolutely important. And my point is that a part of the fix for policing in Chicago has got to be adding more high-quality African-American candidates to the pool. It's got to be. Now, I'm not blaming the police department here. The Chicago Public Schools have a part in this as well in terms of producing people who can become candidates. But the police department, if they're going to be successful, they're going to have to be reflective of the communities that they're working to serve and protect.
But also, the police department has just such a horrific image in your communities, right? I mean, people don't, from what I understand, people don't, generally speaking, trust the police. So that has to be repaired too.
Absolutely.
So all of these things all have to happen at the same time.
Or in some kind of quick sequence.
Very quick sequence, yeah.
Well, but they can happen. I mean, just today, as we so noted, 7 policemen were fired.
Or suggested to be fired.
Right.
Yeah, still got to go through the police
right.
board.
There's a lot of process yet. Yeah.
Even that is a good signal that's coming out that it's going to be different this time, that we're taking this serious. Right. So even that, and they may or may not be fired, and that might lead to some other things, but I think that's the right signal. And you've got to do those kinds of things. But there are many more right signals that need to be sent in order to earn the trust of the community again.
Yeah, I think in the release of the videos, whether or not it's, I think the police might also see it as advantageous for them to release videos. We saw one video where the police, it looked like they were doing a really good job and apprehended a suspect that was shooting at them. So I think people might come around to the idea that, it's not a bad idea for people to actually see what's going on.
Well, I've been kind of banging this drum maybe a little bit too much here on the show the last few weeks, but I am of the belief that these body cams and dashboard cams are going to be the vehicle that is going to create police reform all across the country. I just believe it. I don't know. You said a very interesting thing about the Emmett Till photograph. This is a little bit more complicated, but I think that this is a real moment. Because you're seeing it from both sides. You see the Laquan McDonald, and you know that everything that went down there was wrong. You see the O'Neill thing, and it's not quite everything that went down that was wrong, but you begin to see the need for really serious reforms in training. Then you see the video this morning, and you say, God, I wouldn't want to be one of these cops for anything. I mean, you're driving along, and a guy is leaning out the window and shooting at you, and yet you still make apparently a pretty clean apprehension. The video is telling us that this is complicated. The video is teaching us lessons, I think.
And it's also cell phone video as well.
Oh, all of it is,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for helping us solve the issues
Well, if I
of
could,
policing in Chicago.
well, actually, I'd like to just announce one more time that on Labor Day
Yes.
weekend, we want everybody in Chicago to be out in their community. So if you're in Uptown, if you're in Rogers Park, Edgewater, wherever you are, walk the streets and you will be a part of this community peace search. Whether you're in Inglewood, Roseland, Auburn, Gresham, just get out and do what you normally would do. So we're trying to make sure that we're not afraid, the populace. We're trying to make sure that we're working with good police, and we're trying to make sure that Chicago loses that reputation as Chirac and picks up one as Chicago, a city of peace.
How could you live in some of these neighborhoods? We don't need to name them, we all know them. How could you live in these neighborhoods and not be afraid to come out on the street? How can you convince people that they should not be afraid, that they should come out and stand on the corner, when some idiot in a car can drive by and take out 4 of them in 5 seconds? I don't understand.
I would try to convince them by telling them that they can live, whatever that means, their lives in one of 2 ways. You can live your life being afraid, and probably the bad things that you think might happen, they're going to happen anyway. Or you can live your life being unafraid and working towards the kind of community and the kind of city that you deserve.
You done?
Those are optimistic words, and I think that some people do take them to heart. I know many people who live in communities like the ones we're not going to name, obviously, but who go about their daily day and who say, I will not be afraid, and do their thing. I also know people who are fearful and who will not send their children out, and who want to make sure their kids are safe and have reason to be. So I think it's a calculated risk that a lot of people have to take, and I think that that's why we have to do some of the things that you're talking about and invest in communities so people don't feel that way.
It's interesting in a way. It's like it's classic terrorism, isn't it? I mean, these shooters have imposed upon us a perfect example of terrorism. They're making us afraid. They're making us afraid of being in our own city.
And I think if people talked about it that way and talked to young people who are involved in that sort of thing like that and said, this is what you are, that might change. We don't talk to people like that.
Well, I mean, again, another drum that I've banged a few times at this table too is that, you know, if Lee Bay said the other day, if you could take all the people who've been shot in Chicago and they would fill the Oriental Theater and there'd be 500 people milling around in the lobby. I mean, that's just a good graphic example. But I've said here, just imagine, I don't know how many people have been shot in Chicago as we stand right now. It's thousands and thousands.
Pushing 2,800.
2,800 people. Imagine the CNN headline if 2,800 people got shot in Chicago in one day.
Anywhere
In the world.
Right.
It would be the news for 3 weeks. But because it happens in slow motion and it happens in places that are not generally covered by news media, it just becomes something that we gradually become tolerant of in a really perverse sort of way.
You know what? There's also an interesting thing. I mean, we want to say one thing about the young people and how we might characterize them. I think it's also important to talk about what possibilities people have and what things, not just jobs, but recreational opportunities, things that people can do so that young people feel that there are some options and other things that are available to them besides feeling like a family with folks who aren't doing
part of a community.
something that are doing something wrong, because that's part of it. That's part of it. So we have to think about it in that way too. So you don't want to characterize these people who are involved in that kind of activity, gang activity, as people who are terrorists, although they are terrorizing their communities. You want to be able to provide kids with some options, because a lot of these young people are kids, you know, and it's a tough situation.
Yeah,
all the way
in
around.
fact, not only are they kids, they're of the communities. The communities produce these young people who are doing these behaviors. But I like to just take us back 50 years or so to the Kerner report. And they projected in that report that we were evolving to two Americas. One, you know, minority and poor, and the other, what we have here in Chicago.
It's
So
not
we
like-
actually have two Chicagos here.
It's like one of these slow-moving freight trains
Yeah.
coming at you. It's not like you didn't have the chance to get
Oh,
out of the
absolutely.
way, but we all just sat there and let it run over
And
us.
so we actually have two Chicagos.
Yeah.
So
I like to call it 3.
Yeah.
this Labor
Everybody
Day
has
weekend,
a number. Yeah.
this Labor Day weekend, on certain parts of the north side of Chicago, there won't be one incident of violence. And then in other communities, the communities that we're going to be focusing on, they're expecting numerous incidents, many unreported. So we want it to be one Chicago this Labor Day weekend,
You know,
with no violence.
Apropos of almost nothing, many years ago when I worked at WBEZ, I was working on a story about something or other, it doesn't matter, and I was in the municipal reference library looking at old daily newses, I think they were, and I cannot remember the name of the columnist, but he would have been the Royko of his day in 1962. And it was one of the most chilling columns I'd ever read, because he had just been given a tour of the first of the,
Public housing.
oh my God, here we go, another one of these moments. The
Robert Taylor.
Robert Taylor. Oh, thank you. He had just been given a tour.
I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, of one of the first tower, and he wrote this column saying it's a gleaming, beautiful white building, but it has everything imaginable wrong with it, and it will create the most fetid vertical slum in the history of the world right here in Chicago, because of the open elevators and all the other things that we all came to understand. And again, it reads to me as this exact thing we were just talking about. These are not things that have suddenly sprung upon us from nowhere. The seeds of this have been planted, well, from the writing of the Constitution, I suppose, but there you
Well,
go.
I think a lot of it also has to just do with disinvestment. I mean,
Absolutely
because
right.
I mean, you can drive around the city and see sky rises,
Right.
and that look like Robert Taylor.
Yes, right, built
And-
at the same
well,
time.
Built at the same
Yeah.
time, function well.
Yeah.
And what's
Right.
the difference? They had money, they had investment. They had people paying attention to them.
Well,
and
we
maintaining them.
still could get into the whole weird notion of architecture of like throwing people into.
Well, that's true.
But anyway, let's do that another time.
Yes.
Hour 32.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Our new 32 DVD set, which you'll want to see. Phillip, of course, at one point ran the CHA.
I did.
For a period of time there, and
Or it ran me.
or it ran. Yeah, I'm sure it did. Yes. And you have such an interesting resume. We'll have to talk about that on hour 36. We just don't have time today. Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you both at the table today. I've really enjoyed talking to you, so thanks. Cheryl Corley is with National Public Radio. She is a correspondent there based in Chicago, and she does all kinds of really interesting stuff, and all you got to do is go to npr.org and see it. And Phillip Jackson is with the Black Star Project. I got it right this time.
And also working with the Chicago Justice or Else Committee, local organizing committee,
And-
with the Nation of Islam.
And you're doing the big thing that's coming up on Labor Day. So
That is
get
correct.
out of the house on Labor Day and join Phillip and everybody else out there and stand and defend your corner. Okay? All right. Thank you very much for watching. And I hope you'll come back again next week for another edition of Chicago Newsroom. You can see this and all of our other shows just right here by going to this address and watch us on YouTube, and I hope you will. And like I said, next week we'll carry on. So thanks very much, and thanks to CAN TV for producing this show. Bye.